Good evening, welcome to episode 9 of the Hearthstone Half Hour. I'm Hammy on behalf of Felcroft.org, and in our latest episode we're going to be taking the Druid Arena deck that we drafted in episode 8 and taking it through what will probably be the last of its paces. I'd previously recorded this episode, but the microphone sound did not come through, so in case you're wondering when we jump in why I'm 2 games out of 3-3, then that is why. So we only have one more loss to go. This deck was a bit of a struggle to draft, but in episode 8, let me just jump into Hearthstone. We were more focusing on how to draft an arena deck that you weren't too familiar with, and going through a few sort of key kind of deck building techniques, deck building ideas that you can jump in with in a fairly simple way. The main ones of those were things like synergy, making sure that you had a bunch of cards in terms of the neutral cards that come out and that sort of work well with each other, I think is the best way of describing it. Things that will work, things that will combo together, making sure you had a solid spine of your deck, so regardless of what kind of class specific cards or hero specific cards you might get amazing druid cards, you might get amazing priest cards, whatever class you manage to get in the arena, or you might get terrible ones. But having a solid spine of good minions, making sure that you've got a good awareness of the neutral minion pool, will help you a big bunch in getting a pretty solid arena deck, of course lady luck pending. And the third thing we took a quick look at was a few very, very simple techniques in terms of if you're in the middle of a draft, if you've got to suss out the heroes before your draft begins, just having a look at a few things to make sure that you're not diving in absolutely blind. So for example, as we showed you last time, when you're in the arena screen like so, you can actually just jump back out even if you're halfway through drafting your deck, jumping into my collection, and a few things in terms of using crafting mode to have a look at some cards that you might not have already if you've not level 20'd the class yet. It's ideal that you play a little bit of each class probably before jumping into the arena, but most people are human, want to have a little play, want to get going as soon as possible, probably regardless of the consequences. So we showed you a few things like jumping into crafting mode to be able to have a look through cards that you might not have yet. So even if you don't have the actual cards yet through leveling up in a particular class, they could well come out in the arena, so it's good to be prepared. And if you need to check in depth the sort of how a class works, you can jump into crafting mode and into my collection too, so you can have a look through the cards that you may not have acquired and just see how your deck might actually end up being drafted. So before we get cracking, we'll just quickly run you through the lamentable story of this Druid deck so far. So I'm not massively familiar with playing Druid. I'm probably only level 3 or level 4. I played against a few Druids. I came into an arena, and at the beginning of the arena I had 3 classes to choose from, none of whom I was massively familiar with, but I was probably the least familiar with Druid. So I picked Druid in episode 8, which you can find on our YouTube or our twitch.tv archive, and used a few basic concepts to try and pull together what I thought would be a reasonable deck, luck pending. So firstly I thought about a theme, and going with a theme, whether you're building your own constructed deck or whether you're in an arena mode, is really, really handy. It gives you a sort of a touch point, a cornerstone to build your deck from. If you're in doubt as to what to pick, if you're not quite sure what you should be doing, it always gives you a point to come back to, and the closer you can get to that theme, the more likely it is that you'll have a deck that just generally works well in itself. So my theme here, as you can see from the mana curve, was a swarm, hence Druid Swarm. I thought about doing a Murloc Swarm. You can see I tried to pick a few Murlocs. They didn't really come out for me in mass, which was a shame. But my general theme was around getting lots of cards early on that buffed each other, that were cheap mana, and that I could try and start overwhelming my opponent with early. I then sort of picked a solid spine of minions, things like an Emperor Cobra for example. I can destroy any minion if I can keep it alive for a go, so whether it's 10-10 health and attack or 1-1, the Cobra just needs to damage it once. Other little bits, the Spellbreaker, quite common in constructed. That Silencer minion can come in handy, whether you silence a tank, silence an ability, so a very solid minion in general. And a few other bits and bobs too in terms of Direwolf Alpha, buffing early minions, some card draw in terms of Loot Hoarder, my Swarm theme, the Pint-Sized Summoner, meaning that I can play minions for 1 less mana. So the draw in terms of a pure Swarm didn't come out hugely. Innovate, a Druid specific card giving me the extra mana. In the 2 games that I've lost, I've not really seen it so far, but that in theory should let me get more cards on the table more quickly. So that should be good. So I drafted as close to a swarm theme as I could without going through my entire deck list. There is a mana curve focus around early game minions. When we come into the mid game, hopefully I've done a bunch of damage. I've got a few cards that should allow trades, some solid spine cards like the Chillwind Yeti, common in constructed as well, and good to pick in arena. And then, as you can see, my mana curve peters out a little bit by the end here. If I've not won by this point, put it this way, I'm in a little bit of trouble. But we've grabbed a Corehound, a Silverhand Knight gets another minion on the table. So hopefully there are a few finishes. And the Faceless Manipulator, again, choose a minion and become a copy of it. If my opponent is playing Ragnaros or something incredibly painful, then you know what, I might just be able to copy that and pull it out of the bag as well. So I tried my best to stick to a theme. I wasn't that familiar with Druid, so I made sure that in the middle of my draft I jumped back into my collection and had a real look and tried to get familiar as to what the cards are actually doing. And then to finish up, I made sure that as much as possible I tried to keep picking cards that would centre around my theme of getting a deck out early doors. So without further ado, let's jump into what hopefully won't be my last arena game, but with 2 defeats on the board already, it could be a bit tricky. Just as a quick summary of the 2 games that I've already played, the first one I got absolutely trashed. Nothing I wanted to draw. The theme of my deck didn't really come out. And the second game I was unlucky. I was trading well. The board was relatively clear until the mid game, and then my deck kind of ran out of steam. Interesting. So, beg pardon. This will be an interesting learning exercise. Got a mirror match, Druid versus Druid. Let's take a quick look as to what I've got. And the Argent Squire is a 1 card, the Pint-Sized Summoner for 2, Savage Roar for a 3, Spellbreaker 4. It gives me a reasonable curve there. I'm actually going to trade these 2. I could keep that Savage Roar. The 2 attack buff is a very good one. But I'd just like, I think, a couple more cheap cards. And an Innovate, I've got that out, so I can gain another 2 mana crystals. I've got the coin for another mana crystal. It feels as though that's quite a good start. He's dropped a 2-1 Worgen Infiltrator. Now I could really accelerate myself to a swipe, but there's no need to do that. I don't want to lose my Pint-Sized Summoner, so I'm going to try and trade that away for the time being.
The light protects me.
I'm hoping that he's going to unstealth his Worgen Infiltrator. Good afternoon or good evening to whoever's just tuned in. I can see a few of you jumping in on Twitch. Welcome to our Hearthstone Half Hour. And today we are finishing up a Druid Arena run and also talking about a few basics in terms of drafting arena decks for newer players. So, he's buffed up his Druid and he's taken away my Divine Shield. I can't kill this Worgen Infiltrator just yet, sadly. What options do I have? Swipe. Swipe could do something. As soon as I drop the Pint Size, he's going to kill it. It's a good trade. It's worth bringing his Worgen out of stealth for that. So I'm going to try and avoid that for the time being. 2 attacks not going to do too much. A swipe could clear the field. This is a dubious move. So the reason I went for that is for better or for worse, wanting to try and clear the field so I can get my Pint Size down.
Let the pain speak to me.
I can safely draw my Pint Size. Whenever I damage him, he gets a card draw there with the Acolyte of Pain. So in a draft deck, in an arena deck, in the absence of any card draw in your particular class, then that can do a good job. I could buff up a Savage Roar just to kill him in one shot, or I could get myself another minion down. I think for the time being, I'm just going to get another minion on the table. I'm also not going to attack him because I don't want him to draw a card. There's no need to accelerate his deck and whatever his strategy might be for him. But it's a sensible move there. He can knock one of my minions out and he can draw a card himself. Yeah, he's with the little gold highlight. Ouch. There we go. Damaged his own minion to draw 2 more cards. That was a smart little combo there. So he dealt 1 damage and draws a card with Wrath, and then the Acolyte of Pain's ability lets him draw another card too. So he would have drawn a good few cards from that Acolyte. Don't forget, of course, that in Hearthstone, some cards let you actually damage yourself or buff your opponent as well. It may sound strange to damage yourself, but that example has just shown you a nice little combo. And buffing your opponent's minions, particularly when I play Priest, can be very handy too. So when I get my cheaper minions, I can do the exact same as my learned friend here, if I want to. I'm going to save this Faceless Manipulator, because I feel as though that could be very handy. I can silence someone with my Battle Cry. That feels like a reasonable move, reasonable play. My character's going to have 2 attack this go. If I drop the Savage Roar, that actually gives me a very good option. This will let me trade. Now I've let him draw a card there, but what it's allowed me to do is at least clear the table. But he does have 5 mana and a whole fistful of cards, so in terms of my sort of deck solid core or core theme, my goal was to swarm with lots of cheap cards in the early game. As you can see, I've not had a huge amounts of cheap cards out on the table, but at least I've kept the field clear. So it's a reasonable start. But effectively, I'm sure he has something in his hand that will get rid of this pint size. Works pretty well there. He's just going to knock that straight out. And then 3 mana left to do what he will with. And if you're waiting for your opponent to play, you should always have a click around. Quite like this one, you can shake out the pelt and it becomes a different colour. And we've seen him innovate into a buffed extra minion. He's taking my Druid skills and throwing them straight at me. Now this might be where the Battle Cry of Silence is good. My Silence will remove this ability. The Faceless Manipulator could let me directly copy him. Power of the Wild would get me another Panther on the table. I can't kill either of those right off. The 3/2 Panther will kill either if they attack me, so there's a trade on the cards there. All the Battle Cry would do is bring this back down to 3/2, so it's not an instant win. +1/+1. I could charge in with my Murloc and remove that. It does leave him with 1 more minion on the table, mind. I'm going to try for this option. I could have done damage to his hero. It's unlikely he'll be able to heal that Panther. So we've got the Cult Master down as well, and he's got his tank, so you can see he's got his swarm coming out now. Okay, so this lets me remove. I can pick a threat to remove, and what I'm actually going to remove, I think, is I'm going to remove that Cult Master, just so he doesn't keep drawing more cards. This will hurt me. May not be the best calculation, we'll have to work out later. I just want to make sure I get his high damaging cards as much as I can, try and keep the field clear. but I'm struggling a bit here, to be honest. I don't have the draw at this point in time. This wasn't the strongest deck, I'd say, in terms of draft, but considering that the theme was to try and get lots of cheap early cards out, they haven't been coming. That's gonna hurt. 7 more damage. So there's nothing actually I can do to lift any of those, just take them off the table. Now, I don't know, this shows a little hole in my Hearthstone knowledge. I don't know if I copy this guy, if he'll become a tank or not. Let's try it. No, he's a silence minion. That was a mistake.
A natural mistake.
Well, that was an experiment.
The frost wolves stand ready.
That is a good way of not reading cards. So, isn't that interesting? When you copy a card, you copy everything about it. Oh, that means I'm going to lose now.
My thanks to you. Well played.
I'm going to concede that. So, that was my... Oh, that was nice of him. A nice little threat there, finally. On the bright side, I get level 4 Druid. That's the end of that very brief Druid Arena run. So, I was on the back foot then anyway, but my key mistake was not knowing, in this case, that copying a minion copies everything about it. I wasn't just going to get an old tank there. So, that's the end of what was a very painful Druid Arena run. Still, for a 0 win streak, I get my key, so let's see what we get out of this. We'll get a nice little pack we can open too. And however bad you may feel about the end of your arena run, at least you get some sparklies. Gold, dust. Not very much gold or dust, but at least you get one pack. Let's go and open that pack, just to make ourselves feel a little bit better at the end of that run. Dude, I do like this effect. The little glitter that follows it around. Druid Corsair. Can I get a rare? Ooh, Doom God, cool. So that completes our very short and sweet Druid Arena run. At least there we saw the deck that we tried to put together, and we saw it taken into practice for the one time. I do have the other game, the last game I had, that was a bit closer. I'll upload that on YouTube and on feldcroft.org as well, but probably it's better to sit on the blog, because on the blog I can actually write a bit of a text commentary for it. I may rewatch it a couple of times and then try and do a voiceover on top of it, but that probably wasn't the best and most reflective game, this last one I've just played. So, at least there, albeit with not much success, we've tried our best to draft a solid deck, and we've tried to put it into practice, trying to keep a solid spinal core of the deck in terms of neutral minions. What I may do now, just as to continue sort of on this theme, I'll just bring up the overlay again and get myself set up for another